In the courtroom, I wore the Medal of Honor. My mother screamed, "You bastard child, take that thing off." My sister whispered, "You will never belong here." They didn't know a ranger's silence is a declaration of war. My name is Captain Paige Mercer. I am 35 years old, a U.S. Army combat medic with the 75th Ranger Regiment, stationed at Hunter Army Airfield in Savannah, Georgia. But today, none of that mattered. I sat straight-backed on the hard wooden bench inside the Chatham County Courthouse. The air was thick with the scent of aged oak and Chanel No. 5, the signature perfume of my mother, Genevieve Thorne. She sat across from me, poised in her Oscar de la Renta dress, every pleat perfect. Her Mikimoto pearl necklace tight around her neck, like a noose of judgment. Beside her, my sister Isolde Thorne, corporate attorney and Southern socialite, flicked her Cartier watch, clearly irritated the proceedings were cutting into her schedule. To them, I was a blemish on their manicured lives. A ranger in full dress blues, out of place among Armani suits and pastel silk. I felt the gazes from the gallery, the familiar faces from the Landings Golf Club, friends of the family, whispering now like I'd become some shameful urban legend. These were the same people who used to pat me on the head at garden parties. When the clerk called my name, Captain Paige Mercer, I rose. The sound of my polished boots echoed on the marble floor like a rifle report in a silent chapel. I walked to the witness stand, the Medal of Honor gleaming on my chest beneath the overhead light. And that's when my mother exploded. Genevieve shot up from her chair. Her voice, usually as sweet as mint julep at brunch, cracked into something jagged and vicious. "You bastard child, you've defiled the Thorne name. Take that disgrace off your chest." Her words sliced through the air. "Bastard child," she screamed again, and the courtroom fell into a vacuum of stunned silence. Even the bailiff froze. Then Isolde leaned in, voice low and venomous. "You never belonged here. Even that uniform doesn't fit you." My lungs locked. I didn't cry. Combat had taught me to hoard tears like rations. Instead, I looked squarely at Judge Hayes, a man whose silver hair and tired eyes had seen too much Savannah drama. I wanted him to see I wouldn't flinch. Deliberately, with the reverence of folding a flag at a comrade's funeral, I unpinned the medal from my chest. I placed it on the polished wood table next to the microphone. The clink of metal on wood was quiet, but in my ears it rang like thunder. That silence was my rebellion. That silence screamed louder than any retort I could have given. Then came the ambush. Isolde's attorney, Sterling Chase, a man who oozed country club arrogance, strode forward like a vulture circling its prey. "Captain Mercer," he said, his voice slick with contempt, "stands accused not only of manipulating a grieving family, but of unauthorized medical intervention that endangered the life of General Harrison Thorne." He displayed a photo, me adjusting my father's IV. I remembered that moment. I'd just cleaned a pressure sore and changed his saline bag. Sterling's caption, "Unlicensed medical action with possible fatal consequences." They turned my compassion into a crime. They twisted my care into a con. Heads in the gallery nodded. My chest, now bare of the medal, felt naked, cold. And in that moment, I understood something. They weren't just denying my worth as a daughter. They were denying my right to exist as a soldier, as a woman, as family. They wanted me erased, neatly, surgically, from the narrative of the Thorne legacy. But they had forgotten one thing. A ranger never leaves a fallen comrade. And this time, the fallen comrade was me. I sat back down, my hands resting flat on my thighs to hide the slight tremble. My uniform felt tighter than usual, like the fabric itself recoiled from the shame being hurled my way. A man in the back row, a former family friend, I think his name was Richard Bellows, shifted uncomfortably, refusing to meet my eyes. He'd once told me at a 4th of July cookout that my father was damn lucky to have a daughter like me. Now he studied the courtroom tiles as if they contained scripture. Judge Hayes cleared his throat. The sound barely echoed over the weight in the room. "Let's proceed," he said, almost apologetically. But the damage had already been done. No ruling could scrub away what had been shouted. There were things that, once said aloud, settle into the bones. My mother refused to sit again. She remained standing like a specter of Southern elegance, her hands clasped in front of her, jaw clenched so tightly, the tendons in her neck strained beneath her pearl choker. I wondered if she practiced this look in the mirror, this stoic martyrdom, just in case the neighbors were watching. She had always been obsessed with image. When I was a child, she would smooth my hair so hard my scalp stung, whispering, "A thorn never looks messy, even when she's hurting." But there was nothing neat about this moment. No ironed pleat or polished veneer could hide the rawness now carved into my memory. Isolde scribbled something on her legal pad with her Mont Blanc pen, then leaned over to whisper in Sterling's ear. They both smiled. Whatever was coming next, I knew it wouldn't be mercy. As he resumed questioning, Sterling held up a printed copy of an old email, one I had sent months before to my father's nurse. In this message, Captain Mercer refers to herself as the only one who gives a damn whether he lives or dies. He turned toward the judge, eyebrows raised. "Your Honor, I submit this as proof of emotional instability and hostility toward other family members." When did she start calling me that? The words echoed long after the courtroom had emptied. Bastard child. Was it really today she said it for the first time, or had she always believed it? The truth? That curse started long before the gavel ever fell. I was 19, home from Georgetown for winter break. I sat on the Persian rug in our formal living room, the one reserved for guests and Christmas cards. My palms were sweaty. I looked at both of them, my parents, and said I wanted to enlist. Not law school, not Capitol Hill, the Army. My father, Lieutenant General Harrison Thorne, the war room legend with silver stars and a spine carved from granite, slapped me. A hard, flat slap that turned my face toward the antique mantel. But the sting wasn't from his hand, it was from his voice after. I'd rather have no daughter at all than one who humiliates me in front of my colleagues. Don't call me father again. My mother didn't flinch. She adjusted the flower arrangement on the fireplace like she'd just heard the weather forecast. I remember thinking, so this is how legacies are protected, by erasing anything that doesn't fit. Isolde was the golden child. She played piano at the Lucas Theater, had her debutante ball at the Oglethorpe Club. Her accomplishments were framed in gold and mounted in the hallway like a curated exhibit. I ran 5 miles by the river, fixed up a rusty Ford pickup in the driveway, and preferred cargo pants to pearls. My mother once told a friend during a tea party, "Isolde is a rose, refined, delicate. Paige, she's like a wild magnolia. Resilient, yes, but too coarse for the parlor." She didn't know I was behind the kitchen door, holding a plate of scones. Maybe she didn't care. The worst came on Thanksgiving. It was the first one after I completed medic training. I called the house from a payphone at Fort Sam Houston. I remember how hopeful I sounded, asking if dinner would be at 6 like always. Isolde answered, "Paige? Oh, sorry, Mom and Dad are out. They decided to spend Thanksgiving at Sea Island this year. The house is empty. My stomach dropped. That night, scrolling through Facebook from the barracks, I saw a photo. The Thorne family, full attendance, gathered around our dining table. Even my great-aunt Susan, who never leaves her apartment in Charleston, was there. The caption read, "Warmest Thanksgiving with the whole family." I had dinner that night at a Waffle House off I-95, turkey sandwich, burnt hash browns. A waitress named Bev who gave me a slice of pecan pie on the house because she said I looked like I needed it. I didn't cry, not then, but something in me calcified, like if I moved too quickly, it would shatter. Every year, the Thornes hosted a Christmas Eve gala, Savannah's Elite, all lace and liquor. I wasn't invited. Instead, I was told to help the staff in the kitchen. "You don't photograph well with donors," my mother once said. That year, I wore a cranberry turtleneck and passed hors d'oeuvres to bankers' wives in sequined gowns, while Isolde played Mozart in the drawing room. The cook, Miss Lorraine, patted my shoulder and whispered, "You got more heart than this whole house combined." I held on to those words like they were gospel. There were no framed photos of me in the halls, no stories about my deployments told over cocktails. To them, I was background noise, scrubbed from the narrative. They didn't want a soldier, they wanted a second Isolde. But then I read about Audie Murphy. He was small, too short, rejected by the Marines, rejected by the paratroopers, but the Army took him. He went on to become the most decorated combat soldier in U.S. history. I read his memoir, To Hell and Back, until the spine split. Audie didn't fight for applause. He fought because it was the right thing to do. That story lit a fire in me. If I couldn't earn my family's respect, I would earn my own. In the field, there were no monograms or pearls. Only blood, grit, and whether or not you came home. I chose the battlefield, and in some twisted way, I think that's what made them hate me more. Because I found honor where they thought there was only dirt. So when my mother called me a bastard child in court, I didn't just hear the insult, I heard the years behind it, the silence, the exclusion, the erasure. But I also heard something else. I heard that I survived all of it, and that made me dangerous. I spent that night in my rental car, parked under the moss-draped oaks near Forsyth Park. The heater coughed out lukewarm air and the silence pressed in. I stared at the dashboard clock, watching minutes slide by like memories I couldn't outrun. I held the gift I never gave, just a framed photo of Dad and me from a fishing trip when I was 8. In it, he's smiling, his arm around my shoulder, the two of us beaming beside the Savannah River. For a long time, I thought that photo proved something, that he loved me once, that maybe I belonged. But now I know better. Photos lie, so do bloodlines. It's what you do when no one's watching that defines you. So I drove back to base the next morning. I didn't text, I didn't call. I just slipped back into my life, a life I built without their approval. And that, more than any medal or mission, became my quiet victory. They had erased me from their story, but I had already started writing my own. The first page of that story started at Fort Benning. RASP Ranger Assessment and Selection Program wasn't just a test, it was fire, and I had to walk through it. I was one of 4 women in a class of 87. Each morning started before sunrise, and every muscle in my body screamed by mid-afternoon. I shared a barracks with men who'd never say it out loud, but their eyes did the talking. "General's daughter," one muttered during our first ruck march. "Bet she gets a ribbon just for showing up." So I ran an extra mile after every official run. When others dropped into their bunks, I stayed up rereading the trauma protocol manuals. I practiced placing tourniquets in the dark with my eyes closed. I didn't come here to be liked. I came here to be worthy of their trust. Week 3, during a casualty simulation, I carried a 200-pound teammate on my back. Half a mile uphill in Georgia mud. My legs buckled halfway, but I didn't stop. I wouldn't. Not after everything I'd left behind. Deployment came fast. My first assignment was Syria. Dust in your teeth, adrenaline in your throat. We rotated through outposts that looked more like scrapyards than bases. There were nights we slept fully geared, rifles under our arms, flinching at every shifting shadow. During a raid on an insurgent safe house, things went sideways. SPC Miller, 19, freckled, fresh out of basic, took a bullet to the chest. The unit froze. I didn't. I dragged him behind cover and dropped to my knees, my fingers already tearing open his vest. The wound was collapsing his lung. I reached for my needle decompression kit. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't waver. Breathe, Miller. Stay with me. I pierced the chest wall, heard the hiss of air escape, and saw his eyes refocus. When the medevac bird landed, the sergeant, grizzled, stoic, the same one who hadn't said more than 2 words to me since I arrived, clapped my shoulder and grunted, "Doc," just that. From that moment on, I wasn't the Thorn Girl. I was Doc, one of them. But that name came with a price. I missed my best friend's wedding. I missed funerals, birthdays, first steps of nieces and nephews I barely knew. One man I cared deeply for, I lost him not to war, but to distance, to cancellations, to the reality that duty came first. In one of the few video calls I had with Isolde, she saw my living quarters, concrete walls, a cot, a duffel bag as a nightstand. She smirked. "Trong nu kai chuang chove, Paige. I can't believe you chose this over a Buckhead penthouse." I smiled. "At least there are no snakes out here, sis." She didn't get it. She never would. The loneliest part wasn't the distance. It was knowing they didn't see any of it as real, as valuable. My every scar, every sleepless night, meant less to them than their next brunch reservation. But I kept going. One night, before our Ranger graduation ceremony, we stood beneath a Georgia sky littered with stars. Our commander recited the Ranger Creed, and we repeated it back in unison. My voice was steady, my heart heavier than my ruck. Never shall I fail my comrades. I will always keep myself mentally alert, physically strong, and morally straight. I didn't think of my mother. I didn't think of Isolde. I thought of Miller. I thought of the men who bled beside me and trusted me to keep them breathing. They were my family now. They didn't wear pearls or quote Southern etiquette. They wore sand, sweat, blood, and steel. And they earned my loyalty not by birthright, but by the lives they shared with me under mortar fire and a shared oath. I stood in that field, Ranger tab stitched to my sleeve, not with pride, but with something deeper. Quiet worth, earned, not given. And in that silence, I realized something. Everything I had been denied, love, approval, a seat at the Thorn table, I no longer needed, because I had chosen this life. And in doing so, I had become someone no one could erase. After the ceremony, I walked alone to the barracks. The tab on my shoulder felt heavier than it looked. I passed others laughing, calling home, sharing photos. I didn't take out my phone. Instead, I sat on the edge of my bunk, unwrapped a care package that had arrived late, weeks ago, postmarked but unopened. Inside was a single granola bar, a used paperback mystery, and a sticky note from an old ROTC classmate that simply read, "Keep crushing it." No family photos, no handwritten card. but somehow that small note meant more than any monogrammed envelope back in Savannah. I laid back on my cot, eyes on the ceiling, and let the silence settle. This wasn't about proving anything to the Thorns anymore. It was about proving something to the girl I used to be, the one standing in her father's study, cheeks stinging, dignity burning, and I think she would have been proud of who I became. After the mission in the Horn of Africa, I was summoned to HQ. Not debriefing, not a commendation, just an order. Report to SOCOM command immediately. My stomach sank. I knew I'd gone off script. During an ambush at Checkpoint X, I deviated from protocol. It saved 3 lives, but broke the chain of command. I expected reprimand. What I didn't expect was to walk into a room and find General Elias Vance behind the desk. The man was a legend. Not in the newspaper sense, no. In the way Rangers whispered his name during long marches, as if it might make their boots lighter. He didn't offer a handshake, didn't motion for me to sit. He just studied me, silent, steady. "I've read your report," he said finally, sliding a folder across the desk. His voice was deep, gravel smoothed by time. "You broke procedure at Point X." "Yes, sir," I replied. I kept my shoulders square, my eyes level. I'd made peace with whatever was coming. He leaned back. Light glinted off his rack of medals, though somehow they seemed dull next to the sharpness in his eyes. "And you saved 3 people by doing it." I blinked. He didn't smile, but the tension shifted. "That's not what makes you a good soldier, Captain Mercer. That's what makes you a leader." A lump formed in my throat. Not from pride, no. From something deeper. Recognition, respect. 2 things I'd chased my entire life without ever knowing how hungry I truly was for them. He didn't mention my father, not once. That silence, it was a kindness, a line drawn. Not to erase the past, but to let me step out of its shadow. Later that month, after a classified briefing, he pulled me aside. "I knew your father," he said quietly. He was sharp, disciplined, but he believed love was a liability, that it made a soldier soft. He looked me dead in the eye. "Don't let his silence define your worth. Around here, your value is measured by lives saved and trust earned. You've got plenty of both." It was the first time anyone had acknowledged my hurt without trying to dismiss it. No excuses, no he meant well, just truth. General Vance never called me Paige. He addressed me by rank, or simply Doc in the field. He never asked about my family. He talked about ops, decisions, consequences. But his actions said more than questions ever could. Once, when my leave got canceled 3 times in a row, he stopped me outside the Situation Room. "You good?" "Yes, sir." He waited. "That wasn't a courtesy check, Captain. That was a genuine question." I nodded. That was the kind of man he was. Then came the moment that sealed it. We'd just wrapped a high-intensity session at Fort Liberty. Debriefing was brutal. Everyone was exhausted. As I packed up, he called me back. "If you ever need anything," he said, "channels open, direct." Not through an aide, not chain of command, him. It wasn't a performance, it wasn't protocol, it was a promise. I left that room lighter than I'd entered, not because I'd done something extraordinary, but because someone finally saw me, not the shadow I came from. And that matters. Because when your own father tells you not to bother him with minor achievements, when your best isn't even worth a nod, every moment of recognition becomes its own revolution. To those of you listening right now, have you ever had someone outside your family believe in you more than your blood ever did? Someone who didn't owe you anything, but gave you everything that truly counted? That's who General Vance was for me. He didn't give me approval. He gave me dignity. He didn't ask me to prove myself. He simply noticed that I already had. And in that, he became more of a father to me than the man whose name I carried on my birth certificate. There was one night I'll never forget. We were at a forward operating base, sipping instant coffee strong enough to strip paint. I was reviewing med-evac logs under a flickering light when he walked in. No fanfare, just the soft sound of boots and presents. He sat across from me, pushed a file folder aside. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. "Miss what, sir?" The illusion that everything back home makes sense. I didn't answer right away. He nodded. "Thought so." Then he pulled out a silver coin from his pocket and slid it across the table. "Coin from my first command. You don't earn this for valor. You earn it for grit." It wasn't heavy, but it felt like the weight of everything I'd carried finally shifted, just enough to breathe. I still keep that coin, not because it proves anything, but because it reminds me that someone saw me exactly as I was and didn't flinch. Someone made room for me in a world that so often slammed its doors shut. And maybe that's all any of us are looking for. Not medals, not applause, just a hand that doesn't let go when things get hard. That was Vance. No speeches, no declarations, just presence and unwavering belief. And in the quiet language of warriors, that meant everything. The call came at 2:17 a.m., Afghanistan time. We had just returned from a 14-hour recon. I was half asleep, boots still on, when my satellite phone buzzed. The name on the screen, Isolde. I hadn't spoken to my sister in nearly a year. "Dad had a stroke," she said flatly. No greeting, no emotion. "It's bad. Mom needs you. Not we need you. Not even he asked for you. Just Mom needs you." Like I was a nurse on standby. Like I was the help. I submitted emergency leave. Within 48 hours, I was on a flight back to Savannah, my duffel bag still coated in desert dust. When I stepped into the Thorne family estate, nothing had changed, except me. No one came to the door. I let myself in. Genevieve was in the living room, flipping through Town and Country, legs crossed, pearls perfect. She looked up, eyes scanning my uniform like it was a grease-stained apron. "You should wash up and change into something more presentable," she said, her voice honeyed with disapproval. "You smell like diesel and antiseptic. It's giving me a headache." No hug, no update, no eye contact. Isolde wasn't even there. She was handling things remotely from Atlanta, meaning she was too busy sipping cocktails in Buckhead to come see her father on what might have been his deathbed. I climbed the stairs, found my father lying in the same room he once forbade me from entering in boots. Now tubes and machines crowded the mahogany floors. The man who once barked orders at generals couldn't lift his hand, but when I touched his fingers, he blinked. Once, slow, heavy. He knew I was there. From that moment on, I became the caregiver. No rotating nurses, no aides, just me. I tracked vitals, administered meds, rolled him hourly to prevent pressure sores. I cleaned the feeding tube when it clogged. I cooled his forehead when fever spiked. I slept on a worn-out leather sofa, surrounded by outdated war memorabilia and the faint smell of menthol and wood polish. One afternoon, I was replacing his oxygen tube when Genevieve strolled in with a cordless phone pinned to her shoulder. "Yes, Margot," she said, loud enough to echo. "She's still here playing nurse. The whole house smells like a hospital, so unpleasant. I miss when this place had elegance." She glanced at me and smirked. "I'm sure it's just a phase." I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I only tightened the strap on the oxygen mask and kept wiping his brow. 3 days later, Isolde finally arrived, Prada heels, blowout hair, sunglasses indoors. She entered the room, took one look at me sponging sweat off Dad's temples, and scoffed. "What are you doing, Paige? You think you're some kind of doctor now?" I stood, calm, silent. She shook her head. "You're not qualified. You're a field medic, not a physician. Honestly, this is probably making things worse." Then, right there, in front of our dying father, she pulled out her phone. "Hi, yes, I need a full-service in-home care team. Yes, the platinum package, 24-hour rotation. No, not hospice. Something with more discretion." She looked at me as she said it. A jab masked as logistics. That night, he passed. I was sitting by the bed, holding his hand. He never said a word, but he never let go. And when the machines flatlined, I felt his fingers tighten before they released. The next morning, I called Isolde. She didn't answer. Genevieve came in briefly, dabbed the corners of her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, and sighed. "Well, I suppose we'll need to make arrangements." That was it. No eulogy, no story, just logistics. 2 days after the funeral, a manila envelope arrived with my name typed in all caps. Inside, a formal letter from Isolde's legal team, challenging my involvement in estate matters. Not condolences, not even a thank you, a lawsuit. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the back porch, the same one where my father once taught me how to polish boots, long before silence took over our relationship. Now it was quiet again, just the hum of cicadas and the distant sound of a sprinkler. I looked up at his old military shadow box on the wall inside. Medals, ribbons, a photo of him, standing straight-backed in front of the Pentagon. He never framed a picture of me. But I remembered once, during basic training, he showed up unannounced, didn't say a word, just stood behind the chain-link fence and watched me run drills in the rain. He thought I didn't see him, but I did. He stayed for 10 minutes and left before I finished. I told myself back then it didn't mean anything. Now, I wonder if that was the only way he knew how to say he was proud. I didn't get closure. I didn't get a clean ending, but I got a moment, a hand squeeze, and sometimes that's enough to carry a lifetime, even through war, even through blood. After the funeral, I found myself wandering the grounds behind the house, places I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. The garden was overgrown now. The white roses Dad once trimmed every Saturday had withered into thorns. I ended up in the garage, beside the old Chevy pickup he used to drive when no one was watching. It was covered in dust, but the keys were still hanging on the same hook. I climbed inside and sat in the driver's seat, gripping the worn leather wheel. The silence there was different, less judgmental. I opened the glove box and found a folded receipt from an auto shop. The handwriting on the margins said, "Don't let her drive with bad brakes again." It was dated 6 months after I'd left for basic training. I stared at that note for a long time, realizing there were things he did for me in silence that I never noticed or wasn't allowed to see. It didn't excuse everything, but it made something hurt less. Sometimes the loudest love doesn't come in words. It shows up in maintenance logs, in glances, in hand squeezes before goodbye. The office smelled like cedar and old money. Sterling and Keller's legal suite sat on the 4th floor of a historic Savannah building. Polished wood panels, framed naval portraits, and the sort of heavy silence that didn't invite questions. We were seated around a long mahogany table, Isolde to my left in white silk. My mother across from me, poised as always in Chanel. I wore my uniform, not out of pride, out of defense. The will was read by Mr. Sterling himself, gray suit, a grayer soul. When he got to the estate division, his voice dipped, deliberate. To Isolde Thorne, he said, the primary residence and all attached assets. To Genevieve Thorne, a living trust containing residual equity, investments, and family holdings. Then he paused, turned to me like a priest about to deliver final rites. And to Paige Mercer, he said, a conditional trust of modest value contingent upon her successful completion of psychological rehabilitation for PTSD as assessed by a licensed practitioner. Silence, then a cough from my mother, a soft chuckle from Isolde. I felt the breath leave my lungs. They didn't just want the house or the money. They wanted my dignity. They wanted the room to agree that I was broken, dangerous, a liability too damaged to inherit even a hallway rug. I stood without a word and walked out, the echo of my boots chasing me through the marble corridors. Outside, the Savannah sun was blinding. I barely made it to the parking lot before I heard heels clicking behind me. "Paige," Isolde called. Not a plea, a command. I kept walking. "Paige, stop." I turned, slowly. She adjusted her sunglasses, voice sugary and cruel. "Take the offer, okay? Be grateful. Walk away. You don't belong in this world. You never did." Her smile was tight. "You're just a broken soldier." I let that word hang between us. Broken. "You know what scares you, Isolde?" I said. "It's not that Dad left me something. It's that for once he saw me, really saw me, and he didn't see you." Her face twitched, just for a second. Then she hissed, "You're nothing but a failure who ran away to play soldier because you couldn't hack it in the real world." I didn't flinch. Not this time. I turned away and left her standing there. I didn't drive home. I drove to the river. The Georgia sky had darkened, summer thunder rolling in from the coast. I parked by the old pier and sat in silence as rain began to fall, slow, then hard. Each drop on the windshield felt like a question I didn't have an answer for. What did it mean to serve, to give, to bleed? For people who'd rather erase you? I had fought in foreign deserts under fire, in places where names meant nothing but trust, meant everything. Yet here, in my own family, I was still the outsider. The rain blurred everything, but not the memory of Dad blinking, of his hand in mine, of the faint squeeze before he slipped away. They hadn't seen that. They never would. They saw what fit their narrative, the nursemaid, the fool. I sat for what felt like hours in that parked car by the river, watching the water swell and churn with the downpour. My hands rested on the steering wheel, knuckles white, heart thudding like a drum I couldn't silence. The same hands that had patched open wounds under enemy fire now trembled in a quiet storm no one else could see. 1,000 memories surged at once. Dad teaching me how to adjust a rifle sight, Mom yanking my shoulders back at age 10, telling me to stand like a thorn, not a thug. The silence at the dinner table when I first mentioned enlistment. The hollow Thanksgiving chair they claimed was, coincidentally, left empty. The dozens of times I swallowed my pride in exchange for peace. What had it bought me? They thought they could erase me with a paragraph in a will, that if they added a footnote about PTSD, it would invalidate everything I'd done, everything I am. But I remembered Kandahar, Fallujah, a convoy in Helmand province that didn't come back in full, but I did, with blood on my boots and lives saved. And I remembered the quiet, the way the guys in my unit looked to me when chaos hit, the way Sergeant Beckett once said, "If I die, I want Doc Mercer patching me first." That meant more than any damn inheritance. The truth was, I didn't need their approval. I never had. But I did need justice, and this time I wouldn't fight alone. I wiped my eyes and reached for my phone. There was a number I'd saved for months but never called. Marcus Finch, Director, Veteran Justice Initiative. I hesitated only a second, then dialed. The line clicked. A deep voice answered. "This is Finch." I cleared my throat. "Captain Paige Mercer. I need someone who knows how to fight. On different terrain." There was silence. Then he said, "I'm listening." And I knew. This war wasn't over. And maybe some of you listening right now, you've been told to shut up, to shrink, to play along just to keep peace with people who've never earned it. But silence is a burden. One day it breaks. And when it does, your voice won't ask for permission. It will demand a reckoning. My reckoning had begun. The building didn't look like much from the outside. Worn brick, paint peeling, a flickering security light that buzzed overhead. But inside the small office of the Veteran Justice Initiative, the air was different. It didn't smell like power or polish. It smelled like burnt coffee and purpose. Marcus Finch greeted me with a nod, not a handshake. His sleeves were rolled, his shirt was wrinkled, and his desk looked like a war zone of case files and legal pads. But his eyes, dark, steady, held something I hadn't seen in weeks. Clarity. "Captain Mercer," he said, motioning to the chair across from him. "Let's hear it, all of it." I told him everything. From the slap that split my childhood in two, to the night I pulled the oxygen tube back into place, on a man who once told me never to call him Dad. I told him about the silence, the sideways looks, the will. I told him about the shame they tried to feed me, and how I never swallowed it, just learned to hide it better. Finch didn't interrupt, not once. When I finished, he leaned back and folded his arms. "They made a mistake," he said. "They thought they were fighting a broken girl. They don't realize they picked a fight with a ranger." I didn't smile, but inside something uncurled, like a muscle long clenched. Finch went to work immediately. He laid out a timeline. He requested every email, every voicemail, every scrap of correspondence. He explained what would hold up in court, what wouldn't, and how we'd prepare for both. There was no dramatic speech, no movie scene bravado, just precision. "Information is intel," he told me, "and intel wins wars." Over the next few days, I combed through years of memories, calendar invites, passive-aggressive texts, expense reports, medical notes I'd scribbled on Post-its, every one of them a breadcrumb on a trail they thought I was too lost to find again. Then, one afternoon, a box showed up on my doorstep. No return label, just taped sloppily like a last-minute errand. Inside were relics, a tattered Raggedy Ann doll with missing hair, my box of childhood stones, all labeled meticulously in my handwriting. A faded swim ribbon that still smelled faintly of chlorine, and on top a folded piece of monogrammed stationery. Isolde's handwriting was unmistakable. "Cleaning out your junk. Maybe sell this stuff to afford a better lawyer. I hear pro bono doesn't win much." The cruelty wasn't surprising. What hit me harder was the method, using memories like weapons. I didn't throw them out. I took the ribbon and tucked it into the inside pocket of my blazer. I didn't wear it for luck. I wore it to remember that once upon a time, I knew how to finish strong. The night before the hearing, I was reviewing notes when my phone rang. No caller ID, scrambled digits, military encryption. "Captain Mercer," the voice said, low, familiar. "This is General Vance." I froze. "Sir? I heard you're heading into battle tomorrow, and I just wanted you to know, soldiers don't fight alone." I swallowed hard. "Sir, how did you even—" "Good commanders pay attention, Mercer. You've earned that much. I'll be there, in the back, watching." "You've got more eyes on you than you think. Hold your ground." The line went dead. I sat in silence for a long time. Then I stood, opened my closet, and laid out my uniform, not the ceremonial one, the one I wore in the field, the one with the dust from a desert still trapped in the seams. That night, I slept for 3 hours, not out of nerves, but strategy. I'd faced rocket fire on no sleep. A courtroom wouldn't break me. Dawn came with the dull gray haze of Savannah humidity. I arrived early. Finch was already there, calm as ever, reviewing notes by the coffee machine, like we were preparing for a tax audit, not war. "You ready?" he asked without looking up. "More than ever." He nodded once, handed me a pen, and said, "Then let's win this." I didn't expect to feel calm that morning, but I was. There's a kind of stillness that settles in before battle. Not fear, not adrenaline, just readiness. The kind I'd felt before every mission that mattered. My breath was slow, my hands steady. On the way to the courthouse, I passed the bakery my mother used to frequent on Sunday mornings. The windows fogged with fresh loaves. I hadn't stepped foot in there in years, but for a flicker of a second, I saw my younger self through that glass. Little Paige with grass-stained sneakers and too many questions, holding her mother's hand and wondering why it always felt cold. It reminded me that this fight wasn't just about a house or money. It was about reclaiming every piece of me they'd tried to discard. I parked in the back. I didn't want the family to see me arrive, not because I feared them, but because this was my war, and I intended to choose the battlefield. Inside, the hallway to the courtroom felt longer than it needed to be. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-faced judges and mahogany benches worn smooth by decades of grief, injustice, and a few hard-won victories. My boots echoed off the tile, no one else's. When I entered the room, Isolde glanced up with the smug detachment of a woman who'd already rehearsed her win, but she flinched just slightly when she saw what I was wearing. Not the lawyer gray she expected, but the muted camo of a uniform earned in blood and sand. Her lips moved, but I didn't bother to read them. I just sat, lifted my chin, waited. The courtroom was so quiet, I could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights. Sterling, Isolde's polished attorney, clicked his remote. The screen came alive with grainy footage, security camera footage from the upstairs hallway. It showed me arguing with my father in a raspy, raised voice. My face looked harsh, unforgiving. The audio picked up snippets of phrases like, "You never cared," and "Why now?" It cut right before he reached for my hand. The murmurs started immediately. A few gasps. A woman in the back shook her head. My mother dabbed her eyes theatrically with a linen handkerchief. Isolde sat smug, legs crossed, arms folded, that same satisfied curl at the corner of her mouth she'd worn the day she told me to sleep in the maid's room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling said smoothly, "this is not the behavior of a grieving daughter. This is someone with deep emotional instability. Someone the late General Thorne himself recognized as unfit to handle his estate." The judge didn't look at me. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat. I felt the walls closing in again. That familiar sensation from the courtroom weeks ago when my mother screamed, "Bastard child," in front of the world. That same burn under my collar, that silent rage caught between my ribs. Then, the door opened, every head turned. General Elias Vance entered the room, not in civilian clothes, but in full dress uniform. His chest a field of ribbons, his gait slow but sure, a storm in calm. "Your Honor," he said, voice low and gravelly. "With respect, I request to testify." Sterling jumped up. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." Judge Hayes raised a hand. Let him speak. Vance walked to the center of the room. He didn't look at Sterling. He didn't look at my mother. He looked straight at the judge. I've served this country for over 40 years, he began. In Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia. I've written evaluations for dozens of officers. I've signed off on Medal of Honor packets and court-martial dismissals. And I'm telling you now, Captain Paige Mercer is not unstable. She is a soldier, and she saved my life. He let that hang in the air. In 2017, near Al-Shaddadi, our convoy was ambushed. RPG took out our lead vehicle. We lost our comms. I was bleeding out from a femoral wound behind a flipped Humvee. And it was Captain Mercer who dragged me 50 meters under fire and applied a makeshift tourniquet with her own belt. He paused. She didn't just save my life. She carried the bodies of 2 other men out. She radioed for extraction. She ran point on the evac, and she did it without flinching. Sterling stood, flustered. General, with all due respect, this proceeding concerns inheritance law, not battlefield citations. Vance turned, eyes like steel. This proceeding concerns character, and you just tried to assassinate hers with an edited clip? He walked over to me, saluted, formal, silent. I stood, returned it. My hands didn't shake. Then he faced the court again. One more thing, he said, and opened a leather portfolio. Inside was a sealed Pentagon packet. The judge furrowed his brow. This, Vance continued, is a nomination packet for the Medal of Honor, written and signed by General Harrison Thorne 7 years ago. Gasps filled the courtroom again. He requested the submission be delayed. He worried that media attention would endanger his daughter, would turn her into a political pawn. But he made his wishes clear, in his own handwriting. Vance held up the letter. My mother's face lost all its color. Isolde sat frozen. Judge Hayes gestured to the bailiff, who took the folder. He flipped through it slowly, page by page. Affidavits, photos, deployment reports, medical logs, and at the end a letter, dated, signed, the looping, authoritative scrawl of my father. She earned everything, the letter read. Not as my daughter, but as a soldier. I couldn't breathe. But it wasn't over. Marcus Finch, calm as ever, rose next. If the court would permit, he said, we'd like to enter one final piece of evidence. He pressed play on a separate video file. Same hallway, different angle. This time, the full exchange. The footage showed my father grasping my wrist. I failed you, he said, voice weak but clear. You're the only one who showed up. You're the only one who stayed. My voice cracked, but not with cruelty. I didn't come back for inheritance. I came back because I'm your daughter. He looked up. You earned this house. You earned everything I could never give you. Then silence, then a quiet, I'm sorry. The screen faded to black. No one made a sound. Until the door opened again. Audrey Cole, the home nurse, stepped into the witness box. Her eyes were downcast. I have a statement to make, she whispered, and a copy of a check. She pulled out a folded slip of paper, $25,000 from Isolde Thorne, dated 2 days after my father's death. She offered it to me, Audrey said, to erase the original footage. I couldn't do it, so I kept the check. I never cashed it. Sterling tried to object. The judge shut him down. And then came the gavel. Judge Hayes didn't even look at Isolde. Based on the overwhelming evidence and the clear intent of General Harrison Thorne, I rule in favor of Captain Paige Mercer. The house is hers, the trust is hers, and this court finds no merit in claims of mental incompetency or instability. The gavel struck again, final, loud, and just like that, the war ended. I didn't look at my mother. I didn't glance at Isolde. I turned toward the door and walked out into the Georgia heat. The sky was wide and open, no clouds, just sun. I stood there for a long moment. Let it warm my face. Let it burn off the last frost of that courtroom. The house wasn't just mine. It was my story. And finally, it was told. When the judge's gavel fell, it echoed through my chest like a closing door. Not on justice, but on a chapter of my life I had spent years trying to rewrite. We won. The house was legally mine. The lies were exposed, but I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. Outside the courtroom, reporters shouted my name. Cameras flashed. I saw General Vance standing beside me, stoic as ever, but I barely registered anything he said. My ears buzzed. My breath came in short, controlled bursts. I scanned the hallway instinctively, and there she was, Genevieve Thorne, my mother, being led out by Isolde through a side exit. She didn't glance back, not once. Her silence cut deeper than all the names she'd ever called me. That was her final act. Not fury, not theatrics, just a quiet severing, like I was never hers at all. Isolde, of course, wasn't done performing. She stood on the courthouse steps, calm and composed before the microphones. "I only did what any loving daughter would do," she said. "Sometimes protecting a legacy means making hard choices." She made betrayal sound noble. Her lipstick was flawless, her smile measured. The public ate it up. I didn't stay to hear more. Marcus Finch held the car door open, and I slipped into the passenger seat without a word. That night, I sat in the silence of the rental apartment, still wearing the same blazer from court. I hadn't moved for hours when my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "You've destroyed this family in front of all of Savannah. I hope you enjoy your pile of rubble." Not "I'm sorry," not even "I disagree," just condemnation, cold, final. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the reply button, but there was nothing to say. That pile of rubble was the house where I had spoon-fed my father broth in the middle of the night, where I had cleaned his wounds and sat beside him through seizures. It was the place where he had, however belatedly, called me Doc, with pride in his eyes. To her, it was just a monument of disgrace. To me, it was where truth finally had a voice. 2 days later, Isolde called. "Paige!" Her voice was unnaturally sweet. "Well, that was a lot, huh? But look, bygones are bygones, right? There's a fundraising gala this weekend at the club, and everyone would love to see you. We can show them you're still one of us." Still one of us? I took a long breath. "No, Isolde," I said quietly. "We are not us anymore. Families don't do what you did. They don't lie, manipulate, and then smile through it like it's champagne etiquette. You buried the truth. You tried to bury me." There was a pause. "You're being dramatic," she said with a little laugh. "I'm being clear," I replied. "Delete my number. I mean it." And then I hung up, just like that. It wasn't easy. My hand trembled, my stomach twisted. But the moment the call ended, something in me unclenched, like finally stepping out of a room with no air. I spent the following week alone in that apartment, unpacking boxes from the house that was now mine. The smell of old pine wood and lemon oil from the floorboards followed me. I moved carefully, lifting old photo frames and certificates, one by one. They meant nothing now. They were the remains of a war that had cost more than I ever expected. I found a photo of me and my father. I must have been 6. He was in uniform. I was on his shoulders. We were both smiling. I placed it face down in the drawer and shut it. Closure is a myth. There's only the choice to stop reopening the wound. On Sunday morning, I walked into the house, my house now, and stood in the foyer. The light poured in from the stained glass window, overhead, casting colored patterns on the floor. It looked different now, smaller, quieter, honest. I didn't know if I would live there. I wasn't sure yet, but it belonged to me. Not just the deed, but the memory, the pain, the fight, and the choice of what to do next. I spent the afternoon cleaning the study, not because it was dirty, but because I needed to reclaim the space. I found my father's journal tucked between two law books. I didn't read it, not then. I simply placed it on the desk and walked away. That was a decision for another day. Later that evening, I made tea, chamomile, and sat on the back porch, looking out over the yard. The magnolia tree was still there, still blooming. The air smelled like rain and something old fading away. I came back to the house on Kingston Drive on a Tuesday afternoon, a week after the verdict. The white shutters were faded, the azaleas overgrown, and the wind chimes on the back porch hadn't moved in months. It didn't feel like coming home. It felt like walking into a history book, one I wasn't sure I wanted to keep reading. The first few nights, I didn't unpack. I slept on the couch in my old bedroom, wrapped in a quilt that still smelled faintly of cedar and old books. The house creaked like it was grieving too, but I didn't rush to change it. I didn't throw away the furniture or scrub the walls. I just lived in it, sat in my father's leather chair, cooked a quiet dinner, let the silence teach me how to breathe again. One morning, I opened the back door and stood in the yard with a mug of black coffee. The sun was just starting to touch the top of the live oaks. I looked at the corner of the garden where the old magnolia tree used to stand, dead, broken, and eventually removed, after a hurricane took it out years ago. I grabbed a shovel, walked to the other side of the yard, one that got more light, and began to dig. That afternoon, I planted a new magnolia, not as a tribute to the past, but as a marker of something different, something chosen. At the Savannah Women Veterans Transition Center, I wasn't Captain Mercer. I was just Paige. I started attending Tuesday group sessions, listening more than I spoke. Women from all branches sat in that circle. Black, white, Hispanic, moms, widows, quiet ones, broken ones, funny ones. One woman named Carla had lost a leg to an IED in Kandahar. Another, Monica, was battling night terrors worse than mine. We shared coffee, stale cookies, and silence filled with meaning. I told my story on the fourth week, not the legal mess or courtroom drama, but the part that came after. About walking through grief with no map. About patching walls in a house that smelled like old ghosts. They didn't clap or pity me, they nodded, because they understood. We became a family, a strange, scarred, beautiful one. We celebrated birthdays with cupcakes and bad karaoke. We sat beside hospital beds when one of us got sick, and sometimes, when the air felt heavy, we just sat in the same room and didn't say a word. One Saturday, I opened the drawer of my father's old wardrobe. Inside, wrapped in a soft cloth, was my Medal of Honor. I hadn't looked at it in weeks. I didn't display it on the wall or set it in a glass case. I placed it in that drawer alongside a photograph of my dad teaching me how to bait a fishing hook when I was 7. It was the only photo of him smiling without his uniform. That drawer wasn't a shrine. It was a reminder that survival is a form of valor too. The days got longer. I repaired the shutters, painted the porch swing, learned how to make sourdough bread from YouTube, and failed 4 times before getting it right. A neighbor, Mrs. Coleman, who used to ignore me, brought over tomatoes from her garden and asked if I needed help with lawn care. I told her I did, and we laughed about how I could patch bullet wounds but couldn't work a weed eater. The house started to feel different, warmer. like it belonged to someone who'd stopped running. I came across a quote one evening scrolling through a blog by Brené Brown. Vulnerability is not winning or losing, it's having the courage to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome. I read it twice, then again. That line stitched something inside me back together. I'd shown up, I'd let myself be seen, even when I wanted to disappear. One morning in early spring, I walked to the backyard. The magnolia sapling had survived the winter. Its first blossom had opened, creamy white, defiant against the Georgia clay. I stood there, barefoot in the damp grass, letting the moment wash over me. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. My mother never apologized. Isolde never faced jail time. The family name still carried more weight in Savannah than it ever did in my heart. But for the first time, I wasn't living under the shadow of it. This house was no longer theirs. It was mine. The garden was mine. The peace earned and hard won was mine. And that was enough. If you've listened this far, thank you for walking beside me. This story wasn't just about my battle. It was about the quiet wars so many of us fight behind closed doors. If something in my journey reminded you of your own, I'd be honored to hear about it. Share a memory in the comments, or just say, I'm here. And if these stories speak to you, consider subscribing so we can keep finding our way forward together.